Today on Let Them Talk TV, what do archaeology and DNA tell us about the people of Stonehenge and what language they spoke? Who came before them and who replaced them? And from where did they arrive? In this video we're going back almost 1 million years. It's a fascinating topic, I promise you, so let's investigate. This is me with my brother and we're standing on Stonehenge. Nowadays you're not allowed anywhere near the stones. They're all ditches, fences and security guards, but these were the heady days of glam rock, and these certainly are the most glamorous of rocks. I've always loved Stonehenge, these mysterious megaliths resting majestically on a windy plain in Wiltshire. And over the course of my lifetime, a combination of archaeology and DNA has shed new light on the site. We know when it was built, we know how it was built, we know why it was built, we know where they quarried the stones, we know its function, and by analysing animal bone and pottery fragments from the vicinity, we know quite literally what they ate for breakfast. If you're interested in holding a Stone Age dinner party, you can have boiled pork and beef, hazelnuts, crab apples, berries, but no vegetables. Despite all this rich knowledge of their daily life and diet, the language has remained elusive. We don't have the voice of their civilization. It's the missing piece of the jigsaw. Let's start at the beginning. The first Britons were Neanderthals. Archaeological research hasn't found any skeletons, but it has unearthed stone tools and footprints from between 950,000 and 700,000 years ago in Norfolk and Suffolk. In Swanscombe in Kent, they found the skeleton of a female Neanderthal 400,000 years old. The earliest evidence of our species is from a jawbone also found in Kent and dated to 40,000 years ago. Has Britain been continuously inhabited since then? No, it hasn't, and the reason is weather. You think English weather is bad now with the pitter-patter of its tiny rain and its chilly April mornings, but shifting temperatures meant that Britain had an inhospitable climate over many millennia. The last ice age came to an end one sunny morning about 12,000 years ago, and it's no coincidence that Britain has only been continuously inhabited for about 12,000 years. The Celts, the Anglo-Saxons, the Normans, they are all fresh off the boat, relatively. So the ancestors of everyone on these shores today emigrated here at some point in history. And I've got to be careful what I say, because I mentioned this in my video about the Celts in Britain, that we are at one point or another all immigrants here, and this ruffled a few feathers. We're not all immigrants, but you are. Moving on, how did those blue-eyed hunter-gatherers of 12,000 years ago get here? Well, it wasn't by boat. Britain was once connected to mainland Europe. The area that linked the two was called Doggerland, a huge expanse of habitable terrain. It was rich in wildlife, and it connected what is now the eastern coast of Britain all the way to the modern-day Netherlands, Germany and Denmark. So those early settlers simply walked across. Britain became an island about 5000 BC when it succumbed to the rising tides of the North Sea, caused by melting glaciers cutting us off from the continent. The population was likely very small, with scattered tribes across Britain. We have no idea what language or languages they spoke. DNA evidence suggests they were genetically similar to populations from northeastern Europe. The architects of Stonehenge arrived about 4000 BC. These were Neolithic peoples who brought farming to Britain. Work on Stonehenge began around 3100 BC with a circular ditch and so-called bluestones from the Preseli Hills in Wales, over 150 miles, 250 kilometres away. But one stone, known as the altar stone, was transported from the north of Scotland. Around 2500 BC, the large sarsen stones were quarried locally before being erected on the site. And I'm not going to cover the whole history of Stonehenge's construction and its function. That's far beyond the scope of this video, and there are many videos and books dedicated to this. I will, though, just dispel one popular myth that it was built by the Druids. No, references to the Druids occur around 400 BC, 2,000 years after the main construction of the site. So we know when it happened, but where were our Neolithic stone shovers from? For that, we need to look at the DNA evidence, and that tells us they came from Anatolia. That's modern-day Turkey. They brought agriculture to Europe and ultimately Britain, replacing the hunter-gatherers that preceded them. As for their genetic makeup, they carried about 80% of their DNA from these early European farmers from Anatolia and about 20% Western hunter-gatherer ancestry. The DNA also tells us that they were darker skinned than later arrivals into Britain, so they look more like me than Prince Harry. But how did they get here? Look at this map. Around 7000 to 6000 BC, early farmers from Anatolia began moving westwards and northwards into Europe. They didn't travel in a single wave, but spread in different directions. Some moved through the Balkans into Central and Western Europe, while others followed the Mediterranean coast, hugging the coastline into what is now Greece, Italy, southern France, and the Iberian Peninsula. From there, farming eventually reached Britain around 4000 BC. Most of the people who settled in Britain seem to have descended from those who had taken this Mediterranean route. Well, okay, that's the migratory history out of the way. The next question is, what language or languages did they speak? First, we need to answer the question, was it an Indo-European language? And these are the Indo-European language spoken today in Europe and Asia. It includes English, French, Russian, Hindi, Persian. But where did it all begin? Of course, the English spoken in Britain now is not a direct descendant of those Neolithic farmers from Anatolia. That population was replaced, and I'll talk more about that in a moment. But where is the home of the Proto-Indo-European language? And does it have a bearing on our story? Now, there are three main theories. The first is the Steppe or Kurgan hypothesis. It states that Proto-Indo-European originated on the Pontic-Caspian steppe in what is now Ukraine and southern Russia. And that occurred around 4000 to 3000 BC, and that it was later spoken and spread by the Yamnaya culture. However, interesting as this is, the DNA evidence tells us that the builders of Stonehenge came from Anatolia. So let's look at the other theories. The second theory is known as the Anatolian Hypothesis. Sounds promising. It was first put forward by Colin Renfrew, a British archaeologist, in 1987. It states that the homeland of the Indo-European language is Anatolia, where it was spoken around 8000 to 7000 BC by the very same first farmers who gradually moved across Europe and Asia, not only spreading agriculture, but their language too. Brilliant. If that's the case, that would solve our mystery in one fell swoop. It would be very likely that the peoples of Stonehenge spoke an Indo-European language. But I'm afraid that this is not backed up by the DNA evidence, which backs up the steppe theory of migration. But there's more. Third, we have some very recent groundbreaking research known as the Proto-Indo-Anatolian theory in a 2025 article in the magazine Nature entitled The Genetic Origin of the Indo-Europeans by David Reich and other authors of his team at Harvard Medical School. They agree that the Yamnaya people colonized swathes of Europe and Asia, taking the language with them. So far, so good. But the oldest Indo-European language that we have records of is Hittite, in the form of cuneiform writing from around 1700 BC. The Hittites were from Anatolia, and there were other ancient Indo-European languages in Anatolia, and yet the research tells us that these Anatolians had no Yamnaya ancestry whatsoever. Also, Hittite is so different from the Yamnaya Indo-European languages that it should be categorized differently. Therefore, it's postulated that the Yamnaya and the Hittites share a common ancestor. The DNA genetic evidence backs this up, and it is said to be found between the North Caucasus Mountains and the lower Volga River. The research shows that both the Yamnaya and the Anatolian had ancestral DNA from this region. They refer to this language as Proto-Indo-Anatolian, and that Yamnaya and Hittite spoke sibling languages. The Anatolian branch gave us Greek, Albanian, and Armenian languages, amongst others, and the Yamnaya branch gave us Celtic, Latin, German, eventually English, etc. But here's the thing, Proto-Indo-Anatolian unity existed around 4400 to 4000 BC. In the Caucasus, the Anatolian branch was established in Anatolia probably somewhere between 4000 and 3000 BC. For our quest, this makes it too late because the Anatolian farmers had eventually reached Britain, had already hit the road and were already dragging megaliths across Salisbury Plain way before the Hittites reached Anatolia. And if you remember, they started their long journey from Anatolia, so around 7000 to 6000 BC. Therefore, we have to ask ourselves what language or languages were spoken in Anatolia prior to the arrival of the colonizers from the Caucasus that would bring Hittite and other Proto-Indo-Anatolian languages. Fortunately, there is evidence that at least one language was spoken then, and that is the Hattic language. Hattic is the oldest attested language of Anatolia and was the language of the indigenous people of central Anatolia. The Hattians did not write anything down themselves. What we know comes from Hittite texts from the 2nd millennium BC. Furthermore, the Hittites borrowed some vocabulary as well as the names of some mountains, rivers, cities, and gods from Hattic. Languages have long histories. For example, Dravidian languages spoken in South India today have been spoken in South India since at least the 4th millennium BC, maybe much longer. And it is entirely plausible that an ancestor of Hattic was spoken in Anatolia long before 2000 BC. The evidence suggests that there is genetic continuity from the Hattians who remained and the early Anatolian farmers that spread to Europe. Of course, I realise there is no way to prove that they go back as far as 6000 BC, but it's entirely feasible that an ancestor of Hattic was spoken when the Anatolian farmers set out on their journey. Now, it took 1,500 years to reach Britain. It's reasonable to assume that a descendant of this language survived the journey to Britain rather than a language of hunter-gatherer tribes in the regions they encountered along the way. The Anatolians were more technologically advanced than the peoples they conquered. And throughout history, it's usually the conqueror's language that wins out. Think of Latin languages across Europe, Spanish in South America, and English in North America, and it has been suggested that a language related to Basque was spoken widely across Europe at that time. And there have been attempts to connect the names of geographical features such as rivers in Britain to the Basque language, but the results have been less than convincing. And that's not to say that the Anatolian farmers didn't borrow many words from this Proto-Basque. Of course, if the builders of Stonehenge spoke a Hattic language, what's our next question? We know quite a lot about the Hattic language from inscriptions as well as from the Hittite borrowed lexicon. Historical linguists are able to piece together the language structure. So are there any other languages in this Hattic group? An article by A.P. Tikhonova from Idyghe State University, sorry if I'm not pronouncing that correctly, in 2018 found similarities between Hattic and Abkhazia-Adyghe languages spoken today in Georgia and the North Caucasus. It makes sense. These languages are close geographically and they share many topographical features. Of course, we don't know enough about Hattic to know for certain, but if they are connected, I realise it's a big if, but if Hattians' descendants reach Britain, then logically the closest language to the one spoken by the peoples of Stonehenge would be something like the Abkhazian language spoken today in Georgia by about 190,000 people. And it sounds like this. As I said, it's just a theory. Am I barking up the wrong tree? You can tell me that. Feel free to punch holes in it in the comments or add your own theory. Around 2450 BC, a new migration took place to Britain. These were the Bell Beaker peoples, so called because of the distinct beaker-shaped pottery discovered on archaeological sites across Europe. When the Bell Beaker culture arrived, it brought new people with steppe ancestry. The new arrivals had lighter skin than the Neolithic lot. Within a few centuries, they had largely replaced the existing population, with around 90% of the earlier Neolithic population disappearing. What exactly happened? Were they driven out or massacred? Did the Bell Beaker people bring diseases to which the Neolithic population had no resistance? We don't know. The Bell Beakers didn't build any of Stonehenge, but it seems they continued to use the site for some time, as is evidenced by sacrificial burials nearby. As for the language, once again, we don't know for certain, but there are some clues. Firstly, the Bell Beakers hailed from a region where Indo-European languages were spoken. We can look at the names of rivers and other geographical features for evidence. For example, the River Thames, in several European languages, the word Thames or Tums means dark.
Tums.
And some linguists have suggested that the Bell Beakers spoke a language that was a common ancestor of both the Italo and Celtic language groups. And we do not know for sure. From around the 7th century BC, Celtic tribes from the continent started arriving. What happened next? Well, I've covered that in this video here, so do check it out. If you're interested in the history of language, particularly the history of the English language, then do sign up to my newsletter, The Rambler. It's free, or if you want more content like this, then become a Patreon. And I've got a book coming out soon too. Link to all those down in the description. That's all for now. See you soon. Bye.